Before we begin, remember this. Even the calmest waters can hide a storm beneath the surface. When Keanu Reeves walked into the View studio that morning, he expected nothing more than a friendly chat, a little laughter, some warmth, a chance to speak about art and kindness. What he found instead was an ambush disguised as conversation. In an industry that thrives on outrage, one man's silence became his rebellion, and one host's arrogance became her undoing. The studio lights of The View glowed with practiced perfection, washing the familiar set in soft gold and coral tones. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or at least it was supposed to be. Producers moved briskly behind the cameras, whispering instructions, balancing schedules, ensuring that this morning's headline guest was treated like Hollywood royalty. And he was. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the green room, his posture relaxed yet dignified. Dressed in a charcoal suit with an open-collared black shirt, he looked more philosopher than action star. Crew members greeted him respectfully, some even nervously. There was something disarming about his presence, the mix of humility and strength, of stillness and warmth. He thanked the makeup artist after she'd finished with a gentle smile. "You made me look less tired," he said softly, earning a laugh. Then he went back to sipping his tea, alone with his thoughts. For him, this was just another stop in a long press tour. The Guardian, Resurgence had shattered box office projections, and the world couldn't get enough of its stoic, quietly heroic star. But on the other side of that studio wall, Joy Behar was loading ammunition. At 81, she had nothing left to prove, or so people thought. Yet every morning she came armed with notes scribbled in red ink, determined to challenge, to provoke, to dominate. Today's cards contain one name in bold at the top, Keanu Reeves. Below it, underlined twice, were four words: refuses to take sides. Joy Behar didn't dislike Keanu personally. In truth, she resented what he represented. Quiet decency in a world where decency no longer sold. To her, his silence on political matters wasn't virtue, it was avoidance. And she was going to expose it, live, in front of millions. When the show began, Whoopi Goldberg welcomed the audience with her usual warm authority. The applause was thunderous. "We've got a very special guest today," she announced, "a man whose films have inspired a generation and whose kindness is almost legendary. Please welcome Keanu Reeves." The doors opened. Keanu walked out, smiling modestly, waving to the crowd. The energy in the studio shifted instantly. Admiration, affection. He shook Whoopi's hand, then greeted each host one by one. Sonny Hostin, polite handshake. Sarah Haynes, bright smile. Alyssa Farah Griffin, genuine warmth. And finally, Joy Behar. She didn't stand. She extended her hand lazily, lips pursed in what might have been a smile. "Keanu," she said, tone cool, "finally decided to visit daytime TV, huh?" Keanu's grin didn't falter. "I go where the stories are told," he replied, his voice calm, measured. "And this seems like a place with a lot of stories." The audience chuckled. Joy didn't. For the first 15 minutes, everything was as smooth as silk. Whoopi led with film questions. Keanu spoke about the emotional depth of the Guardian resurgence, about loss, redemption, and the quiet dignity of doing what's right. Sonny chimed in with admiration for his charity work. Sarah asked about his philosophy on fame. Keanu responded with that same calm humility that had made him a global icon. Then, mid-conversation, Joy leaned forward, cutting through the warmth like a blade. "So, Keanu," she began, her tone deceptively casual, "you've built this image of being the nice guy of Hollywood. Always kind, always quiet, never controversial. But some people wonder if that's just convenient." The air shifted. Whoopi's eyes flicked toward Joy in warning. Sarah looked down at her cue cards. Keanu blinked once, his expression unchanged. "Convenient?" "Well," Joy continued, "you've got this huge platform, millions of fans who listen to every word you say, and yet you never use it to talk about what's really happening in the world. Injustice, politics, the big stuff. Why stay silent when you could make a difference?" Keanu nodded slowly, thoughtful. "I try to make a difference through how I live," he said. "I believe kindness is action, not performance." A few people in the audience clapped softly. Joy's lips tightened. So kindness is enough, huh? You don't think people need to stand for something? I do stand for something, he replied gently. I just don't need to shout it. The studio went quiet for a moment. Whoopi tried to steer back to safer waters, but the damage was done. The tone had shifted. The warmth replaced by tension, the admiration by scrutiny. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged uneasy glances. Something real was happening on The View, something raw and unscripted. Keanu Reeves remained composed, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm, voice steady. But the storm had begun to brew, and Joy Behar, sensing it, smiled. The applause sign flickered once more, and the lights dimmed for a quick commercial break. Assistants hurried onto the stage with makeup brushes and water bottles. Joy Behar sat perfectly still, tapping her pen against the table like a ticking clock. Her mind was already rehearsing the next line of attack. Keanu, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, sipping from a small paper cup. His composure was remarkable. Calm, polite, almost serene. The chaos around him didn't seem to reach him. It was as though he operated on a different frequency altogether. Whoopi glanced at him with a faint smile. "You're holding up okay?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I've faced tougher critics," he said. They both chuckled, but Joy wasn't laughing. When the cameras came back live, the tone was immediately different. The first segment had been polite. This one would not be. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice steady. "We're here with the wonderful Keanu Reeves, whose latest film, The Guardian, Resurgence, has been breaking box office records worldwide." The audience cheered again. Keanu smiled, thanking them with a nod. But then Joy leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her voice slicing through the cheer like a blade through silk. "So, Keanu," she began, "you said earlier that you believe in living your values quietly, that actions matter more than words. But don't you think that's a little outdated?" Keanu blinked, surprised but polite. "Outdated?" "Yes," Joy pressed on. "In today's world, silence is complicity. Don't you think people with platforms like yours have an obligation to speak out, especially when we see so much injustice?" There was a murmur in the audience. Some nodded, others frowned. Keanu took a slow breath. "I think we all have a responsibility to make the world better," he said gently. "I just don't believe shouting louder necessarily helps. Sometimes real change happens in small, quiet acts." Joy tilted her head, pretending to consider his words. "So you're saying the rest of us, the people who do speak up, we're just shouting?" Keanu shook his head. "Not at all. I'm saying everyone contributes in their own way. Some speak, some build, some heal, some listen." It was an answer both humble and disarming. But Joy wasn't looking for balance. "Well," she said, her smile tightening, "that's a very convenient philosophy for someone who doesn't like taking risks." The air in the studio thickened. Whoopi glanced toward the producers. She could tell where this was going. "Joy," she warned quietly. But Joy waved her off. "No, I mean it," she said. "You've made hundreds of millions of dollars from movies that glorify violence, that show men fighting for what's right. And yet, when it comes to the real world, you're silent. Doesn't that strike you as a little hypocritical?" The audience gasped. A few nervous laughs broke out. Keanu looked at her for a long moment. Not angry, not defensive, just quietly stunned by the audacity. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, and controlled. "I think there's a difference between portraying conflict and causing it," he said. "Stories are mirrors. They show us what we're capable of, good and bad. But I don't confuse what I play on screen with who I am." "Right," Joy replied with a smirk. "So you can pretend to fight evil but can't talk about it when it's real?" Whoopi sighed audibly. "Joy, come on." "No, I want to understand this," Joy interrupted, eyes narrowing. "You make your living off heroism. But when it comes to actual courage, you're quiet. That's not humility, Keanu. That's comfort." The silence after that sentence was total. Even the crew had stopped moving. Keanu leaned forward slightly. The calm in his voice was the kind that precedes a storm. Comfort, he repeated softly. You think my silence comes from comfort? Joy folded her arms. That's what it looks like. Keanu nodded once, slowly, and for the first time the warmth in his face faded. What replaced it wasn't anger, but conviction. I grew up sleeping on floors, he said quietly. I lost friends before I was old enough to understand why. I've spent most of my adult life surrounded by grief and noise and judgment, and through all of it, I learned something. Shouting doesn't heal pain. Listening does. Acting quietly does. Being kind when no one's watching does. The studio erupted in applause, loud, heartfelt, spontaneous. Joy's expression faltered for the first time. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, giving Keanu a small nod, the kind that said, "Well said, my friend." But Joy wasn't finished. She waited for the applause to fade, then said coldly, "So kindness is your activism. That's cute." The words hit like a slap. The audience murmured again, this time not approvingly. Keanu didn't move. He didn't flinch. But something in the air shifted. Even the lights seemed harsher now. Whoopi tried to intervene again. "All right, let's take a breath." But Keanu spoke first. His voice was calm, deliberate, and unmistakably final. "Joy," he said, "you've built a career talking. I've built a life listening. Maybe there's room for both." The audience rose in applause again, louder this time, almost defiant. Joy sat back, speechless, her smirk gone. Keanu smiled faintly, the calm returning to his face. "And if I've learned anything," he continued, "it's that you don't have to be loud to be heard. Sometimes silence speaks louder than noise." The applause grew into a standing ovation. Even Sarah clapped enthusiastically. Alyssa grinned. Whoopi smiled knowingly. But Joy Behar just stared ahead, eyes narrowing, her expression unreadable. She wasn't done. Not yet. And Keanu, though he didn't know it, was about to face the most personal attack of his career. Live, in front of millions. The storm was coming. The applause faded, replaced by an uneasy quiet. Cameras zoomed in on Joy Behar's face, her expression sharp, her smile now a blade rather than a bridge. Whoopi shifted in her chair, sensing the storm gathering again. Alyssa avoided eye contact. Sarah fiddled nervously with her note cards. Only Keanu seemed completely still, his composure unbroken. He rested his hands on his knees, a portrait of patience. But Joy wasn't done. She'd tasted blood and wanted more. "All right," she began, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. "So you believe in kindness. That's lovely, but let's get real for a second, shall we?" Keanu looked at her, silent but attentive. "You say actions matter more than words," she continued, leaning forward. "But your inaction says a lot too. You sit out of every important conversation, politics, equality, social justice, while people who admire you might actually listen if you spoke. Don't you think your silence is part of the problem?" A collective murmur rippled through the audience. Whoopi tried to step in. "Joy, I think Keanu's—" But Joy cut her off sharply. "No, Whoopi, this matters. We can't keep giving people a pass because they smile and give to charity. That's not courage, that's branding." The temperature in the studio dropped like a stone. Keanu blinked once, slow, deliberate. His jaw tensed, not in anger but in deep restraint. "I don't do what I do for branding," he said quietly. "If I wanted attention, I'd have written a book about all the things I've done and who I've helped." "I haven't." Joy laughed, a brittle, cutting sound. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Everyone in Hollywood says that. The humble act, the 'I'm just a regular guy' routine. You've mastered it." The audience reacted audibly this time, a chorus of disapproval. One woman shouted, "He's genuine." Joy ignored her. Keanu exhaled slowly. His gaze didn't harden, but something deeper stirred behind it. Disappointment. "You seem to confuse humility with pretense," he said softly. "Maybe because humility isn't something you see much anymore." The crowd roared. Whoopi tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smirk, but Joy leaned in closer. "You know what I see?" she said, her voice rising. "I see someone hiding. Someone who doesn't want to lose fans by taking a stand. You play heroes on screen, but in real life, you're too afraid to be one." The line hit hard. The audience gasped again. Even the crew froze. Keanu stayed silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on her. When he finally spoke, his tone was lower, steady, and absolutely controlled. Afraid, he repeated. You think I've lived this long afraid of what people think of me? Joy held his gaze, daring him to continue. I've been told I wasn't enough my entire life, he said. Not strong enough, not loud enough, not political enough, not Hollywood enough. I've lost people I loved. I've watched friends disappear. I've stood at graves wondering if kindness ever mattered, and I chose to believe it did. His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from sincerity. That's not fear, Joy. That's faith. In people, in decency, in something bigger than applause. The studio went utterly still. Joy shifted uncomfortably. The attack she'd prepared didn't work. It hadn't just failed, it had exposed her. But she wasn't ready to let go. Faith, she echoed. Faith doesn't change the world, Keanu. Action does, Keanu nodded slowly. You're right, he said, but yelling at people who already agree with you doesn't change anything either. That's not action. That's theater. It was a direct hit. Joy's expression faltered for the briefest moment, but her pride forced her to push harder. So what? You're better than us? Too enlightened to take a side? Keanu shook his head. No, I just don't mistake division for courage. Applause erupted again, this time deafening. People in the audience stood to their feet. The cameramen exchanged glances. They knew they were capturing television history. Joy looked around, realizing she was losing control of her own stage. Desperation flickered in her eyes. Oh, please, she snapped. You're lecturing me about division while sitting on millions of dollars made from violent movies? From killing people on screen? Whoopi's eyes widened. Joy? But Keanu spoke first, quietly. You know what's funny about that? He leaned forward just enough that his voice cut through the applause. The man I play on screen always fights for something real. Justice, loyalty, truth. But he never humiliates anyone to do it. The audience exploded. Shouts, cheers, claps, thunderous, unfiltered approval. Joy looked stunned, caught completely off guard by the sheer wave of public support. Keanu didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat. He simply folded his hands and looked down for a moment, humble again, composed, as if gathering his breath after a battle he didn't want to fight. When the noise finally died down, Joy tried to regain control with a trembling laugh. You're very good at sounding noble, Keanu. Maybe that's why people mistake you for a saint. I'm not a saint, he said quietly, just someone who refuses to mistake cruelty for honesty. That line landed like thunder. Even the lighting crew clapped. Joy's eyes darted to Whoopi, silently begging for rescue. Whoopi looked torn, part host, part witness to something bigger than TV. All right, Whoopi finally said, her voice tight. We're going to take another break. But Keanu stood. He rose slowly, not in anger but in certainty. Calm, deliberate, final. The audience immediately went silent. Actually, he said softly, unclipping his microphone, I think I've said everything I came here to say. Keanu, Whoopi began, but Joy interrupted one last time, her voice sharp and trembling. You're walking out? Because I asked you tough questions? Keanu looked at her, sadness in his eyes. No, Joy. Because you stopped asking questions a long time ago. The studio gasped. Even the sound technicians froze mid-movement. Keanu placed the mic gently on the table, gave Whoopi a courteous nod, and turned toward the audience. Thank you for listening, he said simply. The crowd rose in a standing ovation as he walked off the stage, composed, dignified, unbroken. Behind him, the host sat in stunned silence. Whoopi's jaw was set tight. Alyssa stared at the table. Sarah looked close to tears. And Joy Behar, the woman who tried to shame one of Hollywood's few genuine souls, sat still, pale, and utterly defeated. The studio lights dimmed to black as Keanu Reeves disappeared behind the curtain. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped. The audience frozen mid-clap, the host suspended in stunned disbelief. The control room silent except for the faint hum of the live feed monitors. Whoopi Goldberg was the first to react. She exhaled, long and slow, then turned to Joy Behar with a look that blended frustration and disbelief. "Well," she said quietly, "I think we just lost half our viewers, and maybe the other half gained some respect for him." The audience, unsure what to do, began to applaud again, hesitantly at first, then louder, fuller, almost cathartic. Some stood, some even shouted, "We love you, Keanu," toward the empty doorway. Joy sat back, her hands trembling slightly. Her red cue cards, the ones she'd written her questions on, lay scattered across the desk like fallen leaves. For once, she didn't look combative. She looked small. Sarah Haynes leaned toward her microphone, her voice gentle. "Maybe that's a good place to stop," she said softly. But Whoopi didn't stop. "You know what? I've been doing this show for a long time," she said, her voice now heavy with the weight of experience. "And I've never seen someone walk away from here with more grace than that man just did." Applause thundered again, spontaneous and genuine. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled. "Cut to commercial! Cut to commercial!" someone shouted through the intercom. But it was too late. The moment had already gone viral. And that's where our story ends. Not with anger, but with quiet strength. Keanu Reeves didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply stood, walked away, and let dignity do the talking. Moments like this remind us that true integrity doesn't need a microphone. It just needs the courage to stay calm when the world tries to provoke you. If this story moved you, if you believe kindness is still power, hit that like button, share this video with someone who could use the reminder, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next story of courage, truth, and quiet heroism. Because here, every story reminds us character still matters.